Carl Jung believed that half the people you've loved, you never actually met. You loved a version of them you painted yourself, in colors they never chose, over a face you barely studied. And the day that painting cracks, the day the real person underneath finally shows through, most people call it betrayal. They say the person changed. They say they were fooled. They mourn a relationship that, in some quiet and unsettling way, was never fully real to begin with. Jung spent years watching this happen inside his patients' lives. Someone would arrive devastated, insisting that a partner, a parent, a mentor, a friend had deceived them. And when he listened closely, he kept finding the same thing underneath the story. The other person hadn't lied. The other person had simply stopped fitting the image that had been draped over them. What collapsed wasn't the relationship, it was the projection. Jung understood projection better than almost anyone who came before him. He described it as the mind's habit of taking what lives inside us, our longings, our unhealed places, our idea of what love or safety or greatness should look like, and casting it outward onto another human being. Like a film projector throwing light onto a blank wall. The wall isn't the movie, but if the room is dark enough and the images are vivid enough, you forget there's a wall there at all. You fall in love with the light. Today, I want to walk you through what actually happens when that projector finally switches off. Why romanticizing people isn't kindness or love, but a subtle refusal to see them. What it costs you to keep doing it, and what strange, quiet, almost lonely freedom arrives on the other side when you finally start meeting people as they are, instead of as you need them to be. Because if something in your life has recently gone dim, if someone you idealized has started to look ordinary or disappointing or simply human, you might not be losing them. You might be seeing them for the first time. Let's start with what romanticizing actually is, underneath the softness of the word. It sounds gentle. It sounds generous even, to see the best in people, to believe in their potential, to hold a shining image of who they could be. But Jung recognized something uncomfortable hidden inside that generosity. When you romanticize someone, you're not really looking at them. You're looking at a screen you've placed in front of them, and on that screen, you're playing a film about your own needs. The glow you feel around that person, the sense that they're special, luminous, more alive than everyone else. That glow doesn't come from them, it comes from you. It's your own light, thrown outward and mistaken for theirs. And this is the part that stings when you first understand it. The intensity you felt, the certainty that this person was different, that they understood you like no one else, that they carried something rare. A lot of that was your own unlived self, reflected back at you from a surface that happened to be shaped like a human being. Jung would tell you this isn't a character flaw. It's how the psyche works before it becomes conscious of itself. We don't start out knowing our own depths. We meet them first in other people. The qualities we haven't yet claimed in ourselves, we find outside, glowing in a lover, a teacher, an artist, a friend who seems to have everything we lack. Falling for the glow is how the unconscious first shows us what we're missing. The trouble begins when we spend our whole lives worshiping the reflection instead of ever tracing the light back to its source. So where does the habit come from? Why do we do this at all? And why do some people do it so relentlessly that their entire emotional life becomes a series of idealizations and crashes? Jung traced it back, as he traced so many things, to childhood, to the earliest arrangement between a child and the people it depended on to survive. Picture a child who learned early that the adults around them were unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes gone. A child in that situation can't afford to see the parent clearly, because seeing clearly would mean admitting that the person holding their entire world might not be safe. So the child does something ingenious and heartbreaking. It builds an idealized version of the parent and clings to that instead. It decides the parent is good, is loving, is coming back, and it decides this against the evidence because the alternative is unbearable. The glow becomes a survival tool. You romanticize the very people you can't rely on, precisely because you can't rely on them. That child grows up, but the machinery stays. As an adult, they keep meeting people through the same soft, blurring filter. They fall hard and fast. They see extraordinary things in ordinary people. They hand their whole heart to someone they've known for 3 weeks. And then, inevitably, the person does something human, something small, disappointing, real, and the whole shining structure shudders. The adult feels the same terror the child once felt, that ancient panic of realizing the person you needed to be perfect is not perfect at all. Jung saw that this pattern hides inside our most intimate loves through what he called the anima and the animus, the inner image each of us carries of the opposite, the idealized figure of the beloved that lives in the unconscious. When you fall in love, part of what happens is that you drape this inner image over a real person. You're not only seeing the man or woman in front of you, you're seeing your own soul's picture of what a partner should be, projected onto their face. That's why early love feels so cosmic, so fated, so much larger than two ordinary people meeting. You're not falling for them. You're falling for the god or goddess you've hung around their neck. And this works, for a while. It's intoxicating, for a while. But no human being can carry a projected god for long. Eventually they get tired. Eventually they need to be a person, to be moody, to be wrong, to have bad breath in the morning and small cruelties and boring days. And when they step out from under the image you draped on them, you feel it as a fall. The glow flickers, the film jumps in the projector, and you're left staring at a wall you'd forgotten was there. Watch how this plays out in ordinary life, because it's everywhere once you start noticing it. Think about the way people talk about a new partner in the first month. They don't describe a person, they describe a phenomenon. You don't understand, they're not like anyone I've ever met. Everything the person does carries meaning. A text message becomes poetry. A shared taste in music becomes destiny. The mind is working overtime, editing out anything that doesn't fit the shining picture, magnifying anything that does. Then think about the same relationship a year later, when the editing gets harder to sustain. The little things that didn't fit start piling up until they can't be ignored. And suddenly, the person who was a phenomenon becomes not who I thought they were. Notice that phrase, not who I thought they were. It's almost an admission. What's ending isn't the person, it's the thought of them. The projection is being withdrawn, and it feels like loss, because in a sense you're losing a creation of your own mind that you loved more than you ever loved the human standing in front of you. It doesn't only happen with lovers. Consider the mentor you idolized, the teacher, the boss, the older figure who seemed to have life figured out. You hung on their words. You imagined they possessed some wisdom you lacked, some completeness you were still reaching toward. And then one day you saw them be petty, or insecure, or unfair, and something in you deflated, and you told yourself you'd been naive to look up to them. But you weren't naive to admire them. You were unconscious of the fact that the greatness you saw was partly your own capability, your own potential, thrown onto a screen shaped like an authority figure because you weren't yet ready to own it in yourself. Jung noticed this especially in his own field, in the way followers idealized their analysts, their gurus, their spiritual teachers. They handed these figures a kind of divinity, and the figures, being human, often couldn't resist absorbing it. Whole movements have been built on this exchange, a crowd projecting their unlived wholeness onto one person, and that person quietly beginning to believe they really are the God everyone insists they are. The romanticizing corrupts both sides. The worshipper stays small, and the worshipped grows inflated, and neither of them ever meets the other as a real, limited, breathing human being. And here is the quiet tragedy underneath all of it. When you romanticize someone, you make real intimacy impossible, because you're not in a relationship with them. You're in a relationship with your image of them, and an image can't love you back. An image can't know you. You can spend years lying beside someone every night and never once meet them, because you were too busy adoring the version you invented to ever get curious about the one who was actually there. If any of this is landing a little too close to home, if you're starting to recognize the pattern in the way you've loved, or the way you've been loved, and it's stirring something uncomfortable, that discomfort is worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built for exactly this kind of moment. It holds 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's work, and several of them are designed to help you trace your own projections back to their source, to notice where you've hung your unlived self on other people, and how to begin taking it back. If the projector is starting to flicker for you, this is a way to look at the wall behind it with more honesty and less fear. The link is below. But stay with me, because what happens when the projection finally collapses is the most important part. The collapse rarely arrives gently. Jung watched it come as a crisis, and he understood why. When the projection falls away, you don't just lose an illusion about another person. You're forced to confront something about yourself, because the glow you loved was yours, and now it has nowhere to go. It comes flooding back toward you, all that displaced longing and admiration and need, and you have to decide what to do with it. Most people in that moment do the easiest thing. They find someone new to project onto. The old partner has become disappointingly human, so they go looking for a fresh screen, a new lover, a new hero, a new person who hasn't yet had time to disappoint them. This is why some people cycle endlessly through relationships that begin in fireworks and end in disillusionment, always convinced the problem was the other person, never once suspecting that they're carrying the same projector from screen to screen, playing the same film over and over. Jung called this kind of repetition the fate of the unconscious. What you refuse to make conscious, you're doomed to keep living out as if it were happening to you from the outside. But some people can't run to a new screen. Something in them has grown too tired, or too honest, or too old to keep starting the film again. And these are the people who stumble into the real work. Instead of asking, "Why do people keep letting me down?" they finally ask the harder question. Why do I keep needing them to be more than they are? And that question, genuinely asked, genuinely sat with, is where individuation begins. Because withdrawing your projections is not a minor psychological adjustment. Jung considered it one of the central tasks of becoming a whole person. Every projection you take back is a piece of yourself you reclaim. The greatness you saw in the mentor, that was your own capability, waiting to be lived. The tenderness you saw in the lover, that was your own tenderness, unexpressed, thrown outward because it felt too vulnerable to hold at home in your own chest. When you stop romanticizing people, you don't lose those beautiful qualities. You gather them back into yourself, where they always belonged. The wall was never the movie, but the light was yours the whole time. This is why the process feels like both a death and a homecoming. There's real grief in it. You're letting go of people who never existed, the perfect partner, the flawless parent, the wise teacher who was going to complete you. Those figures felt more real than the actual people, and mourning them is strange because you can't quite explain to anyone what you've lost. You look, from the outside, like someone who simply got more realistic, but inside, you're burying gods. And there's anger in it too, at least for a while. Anger at the people who changed, who let you down, before you understand that they never changed at all. You just stopped being able to see them through the golden filter. There's a particular sting in realizing that the person you're furious at did nothing wrong except fail to keep carrying an image you handed them without asking. Jung was honest about this. He knew that taking back a projection meant giving up the comfort of blame. As long as the other person was the problem, you got to stay the same. The moment you reclaim the projection, you also reclaim responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than resentment, even though it's the only thing that ever sets you free. Let me describe what actually changes when someone finally moves through this, because it's more specific and stranger than you become more mature. The first thing that shifts is the quality of your attention. When you stop needing a person to be your salvation, you can finally get curious about who they actually are. You start noticing details you edited out before because they don't threaten anything anymore. The way they're kind in one area and defended in another. The wound underneath their worst habit. The fear behind their arrogance. People become more interesting, not less, once you stop demanding they be perfect. A real human being seen clearly is far more fascinating than any idealized image because a real human being contains contradictions, and contradictions are alive. The second thing that changes is the temperature of your love. Romanticized love runs hot and desperate. It clings, it fears, it can't survive a moment of imperfection without panicking. Love that has withdrawn its projections runs at a different temperature, steadier, warmer in a quieter way, less like a fire and more like a room that's simply warm. You're not clutching at the person to be your everything. You can let them be a person with their own separate inner world you'll never fully access, and you can love them across that gap instead of pretending the gap isn't there. Jung believed this was the only kind of love that could actually last, because it wasn't built on a fantasy that reality would eventually shatter. It was built on the willingness to keep meeting a real, changing person, over and over, as they are. The third thing that changes is your relationship with disappointment. When you romanticize people, every disappointment is catastrophic, because each one is evidence that the shining image was false, and the shining image was holding up your whole emotional world. But once you've taken back your projections, disappointment loses its power to devastate. Someone lets you down, and it registers as information about who they are, not as the collapse of a cathedral. You can hold it. You can decide what it means. You can stay, or you can go. But either way, you're choosing from clear sight rather than reacting from a shattered dream. There's an enormous, understated freedom in that. You stop being at the mercy of other people's failure to be perfect. But I won't pretend this arrives without cost, because Jung never pretended it did. When you stop romanticizing people, the world gets quieter. Some of the intoxication drains out of life. That electric, cosmic feeling of falling for someone and believing they're your destiny. You may not get that in the same way again, or if you do, you'll recognize it now as the projection it is, and part of you will watch it happen instead of drowning in it. There's a grief in that too. A part of you misses the intensity, even knowing the intensity was a kind of beautiful lie. And there's loneliness in it, at least at first. When you see people clearly, you also see how few of them can meet you clearly in return. You notice how many relationships were built on mutual projection. I'll be your fantasy if you'll be mine. And how thin those relationships become once you stop playing your assigned role. Some people in your life were never in a relationship with you at all. They were in a relationship with the version of you they'd romanticized. And when you stop romanticizing them, they often feel it, and they don't like it, because you've stopped participating in the exchange that kept the illusion alive on both sides. Some of those relationships won't survive you seeing clearly. That's part of the cost. Jung never sugarcoated the loneliness that comes with consciousness. Seeing what others refuse to see is isolating, and there's no way around that, only through it. There's one more thing that shifts, and it might be the most important. When you stop hanging your unlived self on other people, you have to start living it yourself. This is the part that terrifies people quietly, underneath everything else. As long as your greatness lives in a mentor, you never have to risk being great. As long as your capacity for love lives in a partner, you never have to risk offering it directly and being rejected. Projection is comfortable precisely because it keeps your own potential at a safe distance, glowing on someone else's face where you can admire it without having to become it. Taking it back means you're now on the hook for your own life. The wisdom you admired, you have to develop it. The love you adored, you have to give it. The freedom you envied, you have to build it. There's nowhere to outsource your unlived self anymore. Jung called this whole movement individuation, the slow work of becoming the person you actually are, instead of scattering pieces of yourself across everyone you've ever idealized, and then wondering why you feel so empty. And he was clear that you can't do it while the projector is running. As long as your best qualities are lighting up other people, you'll stay dim. The withdrawal of projection isn't just about seeing others accurately. It's about finally gathering yourself back into yourself, whole, so that you have something real to stand on. Think about what this means for the way you've understood your own history. All those people you loved and lost, admired and resented, idolized and grew disillusioned with, Jung would invite you to see them differently now. Not as saints who turned out to be frauds, as mirrors. Each one showed you something about yourself that you weren't yet ready to own. The partner whose confidence you adored was reflecting your own buried confidence. The friend whose freedom you envied was reflecting your own caged longing to be free. Every person you ever romanticized was, in a sense, a letter from your unconscious, telling you what still lived unclaimed inside you. And every disillusionment was that letter being delivered, painfully but honestly, back to your own hands. This reframes the disappointments of your life into something almost hopeful. That relationship that ended in disillusionment wasn't a failure, it was a return. The glow came home. You got a piece of yourself back, even if it arrived disguised as heartbreak. And the more of these returns you allow, the more projections you're willing to withdraw and integrate, the less you need other people to be anything other than what they are, which is, paradoxically, the ground of the only real closeness there is. You can't be genuinely intimate with someone you need to be perfect. You can only be intimate with someone you're willing to see. Jung watched people reach the far side of this and described a particular quality that settled over them, a kind of grounded warmth. They stopped falling in love with potential and started loving actuality. They stopped collecting heroes and started respecting people. They could admire someone without dissolving into them, and they could be admired without inflating, because they no longer needed the exchange. They'd taken their light back. And from that place, full, self-possessed, no longer hungry, they could finally offer other people the strangest and rarest gift one human can give another. The gift of being seen exactly as they are, and loved anyway. Not the image, the person. If you've been sitting with this and feeling the ground shift a little under the way you've loved and admired and depended on people, that's not something to fix quickly. It's something to explore slowly, with some patience toward yourself. That's the whole reason we made True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's understanding of projection, the shadow, and the long work of becoming whole. It's built for exactly this kind of reckoning. For the moment you begin to suspect that the people you've idealized were carrying pieces of you, and you're finally ready to bring those pieces home. If you want a companion for that process rather than trying to feel your way through it alone in the dark, the link is right below this video.